Well, whether it is learning a new skill or simply improving on something that we have been doing for perhaps years, practice is what is the thing that makes it better and easier. The first time, you remember, probably not, our mom sat us down and said, okay, I'm not going to tie your shoes for you anymore. You're going to learn how to do it yourself. Maybe that filled you with excitement, thinking, oh, how grown up I'm finally getting, you know? Or maybe we just sighed and went, oh, more work to do, you know? I don't know. But whenever we were shown how to do the thing, you loop the laces just so, and then thread the loop through the other loop, and then pull them tight together, whatever that rabbit going into the bunny hill analogy is supposed to be, I don't know. We likely, the first time, did not get it perfectly, right? We probably looped them around and pulled them through and pulled it tight and let go, and the whole thing just fell apart, right? It took a whole lot of tries, it took a whole lot of failures to finally get that first one that stuck. And then we cheered, and then we celebrated, and even, though it took work and concentration to get it right, it was awesome. But now, think about it. How many times in the course of your life now, whenever you tie your shoes, you sit down and tie your shoes, do you even have to think about it, right? You just swoop down and zip them up in seconds, lickety-split, right? The problem now, if you're like me, is the actual bending over that far without injuring yourself. I find the older I get, the further away the floor seems to get. It's probably my glasses, I don't know, it's just what it is. But practice makes things easier, and we get better at doing them, right? Do you think Steph Curry learned to shoot three-pointers like he does just by getting up and being naturally talented at that? I mean, sure, he's got talent coming out of his ears, but that boy stood at that line for hours, every day, for years, tossing basketballs after the other, one after the other, missing most of them, but getting better and better. He makes it look easy now, just like swish, no problem, but that took a lot of time. Learning to drive a car, that takes a whole lot of practice. At first, we're so nervous, we seize the wheel with a death grip, we're tense, we stop and we start with those jerks, but as we learn, we become more comfortable. And now we drive with just one hand resting on the wheel. We've got the tunes pumping out, the stereo, a little bit of Michael Bublé, right? We can drive from one place to another and not even remember how we got there. We're so relaxed. So whether it's learning how to type at a computer or hammer a nail, for those of us, tool mechanically inclined or not, maybe using a smartphone for the first time, or just getting comfortable behind the wheel of a car. Doing that thing over and over again, participating in it, repeating the actions, all that practice is what is going to make you eventually get it done easier and your skill at it a whole lot better. You know what else requires a purposeful and concentrated intent in order to get better at it? Being patient. Last week, if you recall, we looked at the words of James, the brother of Jesus, who wrote to the church in the first century about the need to be patient in learning to wait in God's timing for things to be right. Jesus had promised that he was going to return one day. He was going to bring his followers back home with him. And then he left to prepare a place for all of us in his Father's house. And even though he's been gone for a couple of thousand years right now, man, that place is going to be awesome, all that work going into it. And he may not come again for another couple of thousand years, or maybe even tomorrow. We can still anticipate his return, look forward to it, help others to be ready for it, excited about it. But, like a farmer waiting for his crop to grow, we must be patient as we wait. Well, then today, James continues along with his patience theme as we move along in his letter. I guess he felt like there were some other things that we could probably use some advice on about the subject of patience. So bouncing off of reminding us to be patient and waiting for Jesus to return, he tells us this. This is from James chapter 5, verse 9. Where he says, "Don't grumble about each other, brothers and sisters, or you will be judged." Now, why do you suppose that he felt like he had to remind these Christians, these followers of Jesus, both from the past and, of course, us here today, to not grumble about each other? Now maybe I'm wrong here, all right? But my hunch is that it's because they were grumbling about each other, right? It's such an interesting thing about relationships. The more we get to know each other, the closer we become, the more comfortable we are around each other. The easier it seems to be annoying to each other, towards one another. Those little things, those little habits that we all have, at first we don't really even notice them about each other. But over time, they can really start to irritate us, can't they? Like when we first get married, we discover that our spouse has this cute little whistle that comes from their nose, when they sleep. And and you'll lie there awake and you're listening to it, thinking how adorable it is, right? How lucky you are to have such a cutie, right? Little button nose, But as time passes, that cute little whistle turns into a freight train honking its way through your bedroom all night long. And you just want some crazy glue or a clothespin on that sucker to shut it up, right? But with other people in our lives, it may not be so much their physical quirks or their creaks or their groans that they make every time they move. Oh, it's like, really? You have to do that every time, But when we're around people often, it's usually more things like their personality or the way they talk about things that can begin to bother us, to annoy us. I mean, sure, your coworker next week after Halloween is probably going to have a whole bunch of those little tiny bags of chips in his lunch for the next several days, and you know that he eats like a child, like Cookie Monster, and he's going to drop crumbs everywhere. And when he finishes a few chips, he takes his fingers and he does and sucks the salt and the grease off of them, and that makes you want to walk over to him and grab the bag and boom, 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 and just smash those chips into a million pieces to dust, and then toss the bag in the trash. So yes, you may need to work on your patient levels a little bit, because really that's not that big of a deal, right? But grumbling about each other, chips and little things like that, that's not what James was talking about. That level of irritation, the lack of patience we have, that might be an indicator of some other things going on inside. But specifically, James wants to grab our attention, the attention of Christians. How do I know that? Well, this letter was written to the church, and he purposely tells his brothers and sisters to not grumble about each other. This is not sibling rivalry that he's talking about here. Mom, he's hogging all the Legos. She's repeating everything I say. Make her stop. No. This grumbling is when mature, church-going, God-loving, Bible-believing, Jesus-following believers find reasons to gripe and complain and argue about any and every reason that they can find about each other. And while that is absolutely normal, while it is incredibly common for people to feel and act like this, James instills some wisdom to us and reminds us that we have been called to a higher level of living. Patience with each other, and expressed often towards each other, is such an important thing. Because when we do this, when we practice this and learn to be patient and let the things that bother us go, we demonstrate an essential part of what church is really all about. An essential part and a very attractive part. The Apostle Paul puts it like this in Philippians chapter 2, verses 14 to 15, where he says, "Do everything without complaining and arguing, so that no one can criticize you. Live clean, innocent lives as children of God, shining like bright lights in a world full of crooked and perverse people." Honestly, if Paul said here to do everything with complaining and arguing, man, I would be like a textbook, perfect example and definition of a Christian. Because that comes so easily to me. I can find anything to whine about, all right? I can be like a balloon, like letting the air out slowly. All right? But that's not what Paul says here. He says just the opposite, doesn't he? Do everything without all that arguing and complaining. And he gives a reason. Because when we do so, people will see that there's something different about us. Because everyone argues and complains, right? Everybody finds something to criticize or to whine about. But when we choose not to be like that, and instead try and find the good in things, and point out the good, and even insert good into a situation, it's like a light bulb gets turned on. Remember when the power was out post Fiona? I'm never going to watch Shrek again the same without thinking of that name. But for the longest time, like the longest most of us have ever been without power, it was going on like almost 2 weeks at our place, and it was just so tiring, wasn't it? I mean, you adjust, you manage, like I went to the spa for a shower, it was gross, but like there's things you just do. But it just stinks being out of your pattern and all these things that we find so easy that come to us. Well, one night we were over at Jock and Brenda's, and they had power over in Stratford for a few days at that point. Kids were showering, they were doing laundry, using the Wi-Fi because, we take things for granted so much. But it was so awesome for them to help out so much of us, using up their bathroom and stuff. But while we were there, just kind of sitting there, everyone doing their thing, Francine gets this text from a friend of ours that lives a couple of streets over from us. And she said that their power had just come on. I was filled with this rush of hope, all right? And I immediately pulled out my phone and I called the lady across the street from us. I'm like, Rhea, I just heard that there's power near us. Is Woodbine Street so lucky? And she said, yes. And I'll never forget her words. She said, Matthew, your house is lit up like a Christmas tree. Because apparently, even though our power had been out for 2 weeks, my family's instinct for turning lights on was still very strong, and most of the switches in the house were still clicked on the upwards direction. But this was the one time I was okay with that, because when we drove home, I'm like practically shaking with happiness, with anticipation. The sight as we turned onto our street of our bright and shiny house, man, folks, that was a welcoming sight to see. I went in and I gave my TV a really big hug. I turned it on and look was on. Star Trek: The Next Generation. There's Captain Picard. Just a coincidence. It was, hello, old friend. It was an amazing thing. And then I went around and started turning the lights out because I'm still cheap. But what an amazing feeling to have light back in our life. Because light is such a good thing, right? It enables us to see things clearly. It makes us feel good, right? It just wakes the brain up. It helps us not to bash our toes on furniture. And light is what the Bible describes as what others see coming from us when we live lives in such a way that they shine and they reflect what Jesus has given to us. Patience. Letting arguments pass. Finding reasons not to grumble and complain, but instead finding things to be thankful for even. All these seemingly little things can make such a huge difference. Because, my friends, others who haven't met Jesus yet, they notice that light coming from us. It's amazing that when the power is off, when we are living in darkness, didn't it suck when the sun kind of went down there, around 7 o'clock, 7:30, and we just kind of sat in the dark, right? Just waiting for the night to be over, waiting to go to bed. This is brutal. But when the light turns on, just how bright that light seems to be. The last thing that Jesus did on the night before he went to the cross was that he had a meal with his disciples, with his friends. And during the course of the supper, Jesus got up, he took off his robe, his rabbinic teaching robe, and he tied a towel around his waist. And he grabbed a water jug and a basin, and he went around and proceeded to wash his friends' feet. We don't really get the cultural implications of what Jesus did that night. But the disciples did. Because they were horrified. There's a reason Peter was like, no way are you washing my feet, Jesus. It was such a pathetic position to put himself in. Washing feet at that time, it was for the lowest paid servants. A task that nobody wanted. It was so revolting and humiliating. It would have taken quite a while to wash a dozen sets of feet. Because he had no pressure washer. He had no hose. He just had a bucket of water and a towel to take each foot, to gently clean them and dry them, one by one. The disciples that night, they would have had ample time to think about what Jesus, their Lord and their teacher, was doing. Remember, previously, Peter had called him the Christ, the Son of the living God. They had all watched those hands touch the sick and cure them. Now they were holding their gross, dirty feet and was cleaning them. Slowly, methodically, patiently. The very one who had told them that they could see the Father by looking at him. Because he and God were one. He was now bowing before them, on his knees in front of them, washing their feet. Wonder what went through Judas's mind as he sat there. He had that bag of trader money just burning a hole in his pocket from recently telling the authorities where they could find Jesus. And Jesus, of course, knew this happened and still lovingly washed Judas's feet. Wow, there's a lesson right there. Why is this act such a big deal? Now, I've gone to the diabetic clinic a couple of times now. I lost my family doctor. They're taking good care of me. Make sure my prescriptions are up to date, that I'm eating well. And I recently got to have a foot exam. That was fun. Diabetes can play havoc on your circulation, can cause problems with your extremities, especially your feet. You can develop ulcers, which can lead to some major problems later on. So they were testing my feet for sensitivity. This little tiny plastic poker that touched different spots of my feet, and I had to say, where it was touching the bottom of my big toe, my heel, the top, and I had to do it with my eyes closed, all right? It was like an exam that I couldn't even study for, right? But I passed it, great sensation overall. I got a gold sticker. And she asked me afterwards if I ever put cream on my feet or used a pumice stone on my calluses. No, I do not put cream on my feet, I told her. And I was actually kind of embarrassed to tell her that I knew what a pumice stone was, because my sister previously has noticed my jagged calluses on my big toes and heels and suggested I should probably get one. Man, I could climb a mountain like Spider-Man with these bad boys. Just stick them right in the side and climb up, all right? But before I went into that exam, I made sure that my tootsies were scrubbed and they were clean. My toenails were clipped and my feet were in the best shape possible as I could make them, because feet are gross. And I felt bad for this poor lady who had to fiddle and poke mine. But Jesus was willing to get on his knees and clean one of the most vile, dirtiest, stinkiest parts of the human body. I guess we could say that this act was the opening act to a bigger washing, where he took the sin of the whole world, yours and mine, onto himself and died so that it could be forgiven. But washing those feet, those disgusting feet of his friends, showed those guys something. It shows us something. Humility and a whole lot of love. After he did this, Jesus said this. John 13. I have given you an example to follow. Do as I have done for you. Because washing another person's feet, it does something. Because it's hard to look down at them when you are on your knees. It puts you into a position of submission. I don't know, maybe we all need to do an old-fashioned foot washing more often. But the lesson we learn from Jesus here is so valuable. Because grumbling about each other, it is so easy. Arguing, complaining is the most natural thing in the world to us. The people out there, they already see that every day from everybody else, and it's not an attractive thing. But when we learn to practice patience with each other, when we learn to put each other first and care for one another and be willing to do everything and anything to serve each other, man, that's when the lights turn on. And people begin to see something amazing. They begin to see Jesus. Let's pray. Father, help us to be the light of the world. When Jesus was here, that's what he told us that he came to be. The light of the world that stepped down out of heaven, out of eternity, into space and time, into our sin-stained world, to come and to show us what love was. And when he came into this dark world, he came as a beacon of light, to show us the way. Father, throughout his entire life, he did everything, not for himself, but in order to show others that you were real, that you cared, and that there was hope in the darkness. And I just pray, God, that you would use us in every way that we can possibly be, to be light and to be hope to others. That we can avoid thinking about ourselves and the easy grumbling that comes, the natural arguing and complaining that we want to do. That so flows out of our mouth naturally. I pray that you can help us to put that aside, to think of others first, so that they can see the light of heaven shining out of us. Thank you for his willingness to sacrifice himself, Father, to be the light for us. In Jesus' name that we pray.